Hi, guys. Good afternoon. I'm Heidi Heitkamp, and as the IOP marks its 10th anniversary, some of you may have heard I've taken over as the new director of the Institute of Politics for David Axelrod. I previously served on the board of the IOP, and before that, in my previous life, did a lot of things in politics, including representing North Dakota in the United States Senate, and also serving as North Dakota's tax commissioner, which is elected, and North Dakota's attorney general. And so I just want to tell you how grateful I am for this opportunity and how grateful I am for all of you who attend programs like this, because it takes a lot of effort for the IOP to put them on, and we're so grateful for people like the former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who are willing to come and engage students. And so today's event is a conversation between former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and IOP Executive Director Zeenat Rahman. Before one of our students formally introduces our guest, I have to do all the housekeeping stuff. I want to mention a couple upcoming events at the IOP. On Thursday, January 19th, Federal Reserve Vice Chairman Leah Barnard will be in conversation with journalist Bethany McLean for a conversation about inflation and the economy. That event will take place at 12 at the Harper Center at Booth. On Tuesday, January 24th, we'll host an event featuring former Congressman Tim Ryan, who recently was not successful in his campaign in Ohio to become a United States Senator, and the Paulson Institute, Damian Ma, Exploring China, the United States and Economics, and that'll take place at the Ida Noyes Auditorium at 5:30. So I hope that you mark your calendar. So before today's moderated discussion, we'll open the floor to take questions. After our moderated discussion, we'll open the floor to take questions from you in the audience. Please remain in your seats and raise your hand. There will be microphones that will be roving around. The staff will be handing them to you, and you'll be called on. Of course, we always give first priority to our students. So before we start, make sure your phones are on silent. And now we will hear a formal introduction of our speakers and our moderator from Kenza Bustamante, a third year in the college. Please welcome Kenza to the stage.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good afternoon, and welcome to Life After Trump, Mike Pompeo in Conversation. My name is Kinsey Bustamante. My hometown is Eldon, Missouri, and I am a third year in the college majoring in biology and public policy. I'm a staff writer for the Chicago Thinker, our campus's right of center student news publication, a board member of College Republicans, and active in our university's Students for Life chapter. Secretary Pompeo has led a life dedicated to public service. Born in Orange County, California in 1963, he graduated first in his class at West Point United States Military Academy in 1986 and went on to serve for 5 years in the U.S. Army, rising to the rank of captain. After his service, Secretary Pompeo graduated from Harvard Law School and worked for Williams & Connolly in Washington, D.C., before moving to Kansas to start his aircraft part manufacturing company, Thayer Aerospace. In 2006, he became president of Century International, an oilfield equipment manufacturer, and from 2011 to 2017, he served as Kansas's 4th District Representative. In 2017, Secretary Pompeo became the CIA director. He provided critical intelligence that shaped the Trump administration's actions and policies towards Syria, Iraq, North Korea, and China. In 2018, he began his tenure as the 70th Secretary of State. He prioritized religious freedom as the grounding for human rights and established the Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom. He brokered peace in the Middle East and accomplished the long-promised task of relocating the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He negotiated the Abraham Accords and thereby repaired diplomatic relations between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. Moderating today's discussion is IOP Executive Director Zeenat Rahman, who previously served as at the State Department as a special advisor on global youth issues to Secretaries Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. She also served as director of the Center for Faith-Based and Community Initiatives at the U.S. Agency for International Development and director of policy at Interfaith Youth Corps. Please join me in welcoming to the University of Chicago the only person to ever serve as both the head of the CIA and Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo.
Thank you, Kenzie, and welcome, Secretary Pompeo, to the University of Chicago. We're extremely excited to have you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So you were first in your class at West Point. You were on the law review at Harvard when you were at Harvard. Lots of important committee assignments in Congress, private sector, director of the CIA. How did all of those experiences inform your point of view of how you governed at the Department of State when you were Secretary of State?
Oh, goodness. First of all, thank you. Thanks for joining me today. See, I'm not sure how to answer that. I sort of formed before that in some ways. All those things shaped me. Yeah. But my parents taught me to work hard and stay at it. The other people that were around me, other mentors in my life, helped shape me too. But each of those institutions were places where I just had this incredible opportunity to learn and to grow. I learned about small unit leadership when I was a young lieutenant as a tank platoon leader. In law school, my writing became significantly better than it was before that as well. Sure. Each of those built. And then I had this chance to run a couple 100-person machine shop in Wichita, Kansas for years, which really gave me the exposure to what it takes for a small business owner, how it is you drive value, how you build teams in the private sector and create the right incentives, and how you keep customers happy. We made airplane parts. That was a really machine shop that served Boeing and Gulfstream and Lockheed. How you keep customers happy in the face of incredible competition as well. So each of them were different shapes. But the thing that prepared me most to be the Secretary of State is that I taught 5th grade Sunday school for a number of years.
More about that.
And
what skill sets translated?
If you can keep 5th grade boys in their seat, you can manage the Department of State for sure.
Do you consider your point of view on foreign policy interventionist or isolationist?
I'll let others put the label on it. But we were deeply focused on maintaining deterrence with a model that didn't require sending 5 or 10 or 40,000 American service members someplace abroad. It would have been inconsistent with what President Trump had campaigned on. And so we had to create a model of deterrence that delivered the security and prosperity that we were tasked with delivering for America without having a Marine MAGTF or the 82nd Airborne head off someplace. And it is harder to do. The American military provided an enormous amount of capacity for me as Secretary of State, having that at my back. But if you look at the record, we withdrew from about 15,000 to 2,500 in Afghanistan. We reduced the American footprint in other parts of the Middle East as well. When we needed to take decisive action, we did that. But we didn't start any new wars. You should know, when I became the CIA director, everybody said Donald Trump's going to start World War III. And on multiple occasions, we took actions that everybody thought would start World War III. Think of the movement of our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and as the American embassy, everybody said that if you do that, I think Secretary Kerry said there's no way you can create peace without solving the Palestinian problem. Well, we did create 4 peace agreements without solving the Palestinian problem. I wish we would have solved that as well. So the model was one that was pretty different from previous presidents and previous Secretary of State, regardless of party. So this is not a partisan thing. So the model was, how do you create peace through strength with everyone acknowledging that your president isn't about to start doing what President Bush had done in Iraq or other presidents had done. It wasn't in his plan.
So, he campaigned on America First, and oftentimes America First was perceived as America alone. Yeah. So as you met with other diplomats, heads of states around the world, did that hamper the work that you were trying to get done at the State Department? Yeah, no, I remember it well. It's just, look, the media narrative was that America alone, but nothing could be further from the truth about what we did. We were unambiguously about making sure we did our task, which was serving you all, the American people, right? When I'd meet with the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, I would remind that Prime Minister that they should put Bangladesh first, right?
every leader has a first responsibility to the people that put them in power, or the structure that put them in power in their own country. But it was anything but America alone. And this came because, look, we were trying to convince NATO countries, European countries to spend more money on their own security. I frankly wish we'd been more successful at that, but it wasn't about withdrawing from NATO. It was about, guys, you're Germany, you're a wealthy country. You can't spend less than 1% of your GDP on your own security. It will end badly. And we can now see the impacts of them not taking this post-Cold War opportunity to go reinforce their security. Whether in Asia, we built out deep alliances. We built the Quad. Secretary Blinken, who I think will be here next week, has built on the Quad. He's taken the model that we had built out with the Quad, and they've now had a Quad summit to help us counter the threat from the Chinese Communist Party. So it was anything but America alone. But we certainly knew there was an expectation in the world that America would lead, and we wanted to make sure we did it in a way that everybody did their fair share.
Do you think you succeeded in moving other countries to taking that more seriously? I want to talk about Ukraine. I have a couple more questions about diplomacy.
In Europe, in Europe, the simple math. Secretary General Stoltenberg, still the supreme leader of NATO, said that we generated roughly $480 billion worth of increased investment by 20 plus European countries into NATO over about a 5-year period. So yes, I think we were successful, but NATO still underinvests in its own security.
Right.
And I regret that we weren't able to convince them it was in their best interest to do it, because you're not going to convince them to do it because America tells you to do it. You're going to convince them because they concluded it's in their own national sovereign best interest to actually do that. And we made some progress. We did the same in Asia. This week, the Japanese have announced they're going to double their amount of their defensive investments to support the mission set that we were talking to the South Koreans, the Japanese, the Australians, the Vietnamese, all of the Philippines, all of the Australians. So now Japan's going to double its defense output. Those are all good things, and I'm proud actually there that while we began it, the Biden administration has followed that same trajectory and understanding. America can do an awful lot, but we've got to have partners and friends to actually deliver security for the West.
So the title of your book, forthcoming, I think next week, is called Never Give an Inch. Mm-hmm. And I'm presumably about your time at the State Department. And I wanted to square that idea of never give an inch with what the essence of diplomacy is, which is, compromise and meeting halfway. And so how did you strike that balance?
Yeah.
And if I have a 2-part question, what will people
Sure.
learn about you in the book that they don't already know?
Oh, goodness. So I'll take the first one first. The title's Never Give an Inch. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but only a little bit. My son Nick, when he wanted to go to bed at 8:30 and I thought he should be in bed at 8, we'd settle on 8:15. It's just
Totally
fine.
same.
Right? Totally fine. But on the things that really matter, on protecting human dignity and religious freedom and preserving the rules-based consensus so that we can continue to take the next billion people out of massive food insecurity, on those things that really matter, you can't round there's no rounding of the corners. It is an unambiguous good that nations are more religiously free around the world. It is an unambiguous good that you can have property rights so that grain producers around the world can move their product on rail cars and sell under contracts. Best if it's dollar denominated, because that will create the best, lowest friction transactions. It's not like you could say, well, how many particles of CO2 do you want in the air? There's no place to compromise on those. It isn't. So we were absolutely relentless when it came to those things. So that's how I square them. On the details or the actual implementation, there's lots of places one can find common ground. But on the core ideas, the things that have made our nation so exceptional, the things that make America a place that so many people want to be, and the place that nearly every nation in the world counts on for their own security and prosperity, we weren't going to give an inch. What we learn about me in the book? You'll see some great stories about the work that I did for 4 years. You'll see the successes. You'll see the failures. I talk about each of them, the things that we should have done better or differently, as well as the things that we think we accomplished. And you'll get to see the context. You worked at the State Department. You'll get to see behind the machine as well. And then anybody who likes a good spy story, I have some great stories from my time at CIA, most of which survived the review process and actually made it into the book. And there's some great stories, not about me, but about these young men and women who work at the Central Intelligence Agency and every day save the lives of countless Americans doing work in the darkest, most difficult places in the world.
I want to come back to religious freedom and human rights, but first take us to Ukraine. And so we are coming up on February will be, I think, 1 year of this most latest Russian incursion into Ukrainian territory. But if you think about it, Crimea was 8 years before that, so 9 years of Russian long game, I think, of trying to do this takeover of Ukraine. I'm sure you spent a lot of time with Putin when you were Secretary of State. I'm sure you studied him a lot when you were CIA director. Where is his head right now, and how do you think this will end?
Goodness. There's no reason to think that Vladimir Putin has changed a lick, in spite of the incredible strategic blunder that they're now suffering from. He believed before, he believed when I met him, and he continues to believe today in the theory of Greater Russia. If you asked him today, I'm confident, because we had these conversations. Here's the best way to think about it. I'm from Kansas. If you ask me, is Kansas part of America? I would think your question odd, but I'd say, yeah, sure. And then you'd say, explain it. And I'd begin to tell a story like, the Civil War thing, and it came in anyway. But you could tell, if you ask Vladimir Putin, is Ukraine part of Russia? He would think this. He would feel very much the same way. He would feel as though, like, why are you asking me this? This is obvious. It's part of Russia, and he believes that. And he believes that for greater parts of Europe as well. So he hasn't changed. You spoke about Crimea. The most frequent question I get from groups is, would this have happened if you all were still there? Mm-hmm. And I don't answer that question because it's unknowable. If President Trump were here, I know what he'd say. He'd say, no, there's no way it would have happened. But here's what I can say for sure. It didn't happen on our watch. This is factually true. Vladimir Putin took a fifth of Ukraine when President Obama was in power. He did not move on Europe for 4 years. And within months of our departure, he went back at his lifelong mission of restoring the Soviet Union. You can argue it's coincidence. I don't believe that for a second. I literally, and this is important, I believe he understood our model of deterrence, believed that there was a space there. We sanctioned people after Skripal. We were the first administration to provide defensive weapon systems to Ukraine when President Obama and President Biden had rejected it flatly. He would have seen me as CIA director in the southeast part of Ukraine, multiple occasions, training what are now the Ukrainian special operators. So you all should take some level of credit for the success of the Ukrainian special operations as this. But I think he understood deterrence. And I think when the administration changed and President Biden talked about a minor incursion and began to send wavering messages, I think he felt like it was what's the old Southwest Airlines line? He felt free to move about the cabin. And it was an incredible strategic blunder, but the people who are suffering most are the Ukrainian civilians today.
So if you were Secretary of State today, or president, what do you think the U.S. role should be in Ukraine right now?
It's hard to put deterrence back in the box. Once you lose it, it's very difficult to get back. We began to lose it in Iran. We can talk about that and got it back. It is hard work. If I was the Secretary of State today, I would be advocating for providing every single weapon system as quickly as we possibly can to support the Ukrainians. And I applaud the Biden administration for continuing to do that. They've been slow and late, in my judgment, for reasons that I think just don't hold merit. But every day that this goes on, there will be more destruction of Ukraine. There will be more political disruption inside of Ukraine. There'll be more Ukrainian civilians that are absconded to Russia. It is time to go give the Ukrainians what they need to be successful. And when you do that, you also hasten the day that the conflict ends. I think half measures and a few weapons here and a handful of HIMARS and a couple of rockets, I think those are sufficient to wear down the Russian military, but not sufficient to convince Vladimir Putin that for at least a moment, he needs to back off on his lifelong dream.
I mean, I think our support has surpassed $110 billion at this point.
I think that's the commitment. I think you actually have some 19 or $20 billion that have been spent. And it's worth noting, by the way, this is inside of my party. There are big debates. This is not a partisan issue.
About that.
No, there are many Republicans who would disagree with what I just said. The biggest chunk of that money has gone to U.S. defense contractors.
Okay.
Creating jobs and wealth. This is not why one does it, but when the public narrative becomes one of just a bunch of largesse being squandered in Ukraine, that's fundamentally not what the money has been spent on. It has been spent providing mostly U.S. manufactured weapon systems to help the Ukrainians defend themselves.
And you think that case is not being made to the American people?
Yeah, president should be in the Oval Office at least once a month, making the case about why this matters to America.
Why does it matter to America or to Americans?
I could go on for an awfully long time. We can all see it.
Don't go on for a long time.
We can all see it. We can all see it in so many ways. We haven't talked about China, but I promise you, Xi Jinping is watching closely what happens in Ukraine to see if the West loses heart over time. Every world leader who's thinking about attacking something that is in America's interest is watching whether we're honest and sincere about the things we said we would do, so we should deliver against those set of commitments. Second, there's a long-standing set of rules that when you have aggression in Europe, it ends badly if the United States doesn't provide the tools and support. And it ends badly not just for the Europeans, it ends bad for America and America itself. And then the third one is much more market-driven. We can all see what impact there have been, what impact there's been on supply chains, broadly speaking. Kansas farmers had a really good year in 2022 because there were very high wheat prices. In 2023, they will struggle to put crops in the field because of the cost of fertilizer. All of this driven by the second greatest wheat belt is not in the United States, but rather in that territory that's being fought over in Ukraine. There are a handful of other reasons, but it matters to every family in America that we support the Ukrainians in their effort.
Do you think those are compelling arguments for people in your party, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, advocate for not spending money there?
Our party's always had the Pat Buchanan wing, right? I mean, it's a legitimate part of the conservative movement, a more isolationist idea. I just happen to think that's a mistake. So it's not new to have Republicans saying, take care of things home at first. It's not new. I've heard Senator Sanders say this, right? How many times? We should take care of America at home first. And I get that sentiment. I was a congressional leader. I had to go home and explain why we were spending so much money on the Department of Defense. I think the case for creating American prosperity deeply depends on American leadership around the world.
I agree. So this past Sunday in Brazil, we watched supporters of President Bolsonaro storm the country's Congress, the presidential palace, the Supreme Court, because the rioters refused to accept Bolsonaro's electoral defeat, which was obviously for us many ways reminiscent of the scenes that we saw play out on January 6th. How significant do you think the events of January 6th were to embolden this international movement?
Oh, I don't think they were significant at all.
Really?
Oh, I mean, I can't tell you how many protests there were all around the world long before January 6th. There's a long history of people protesting and coups in countries around the world.
These anti-democratic movements are sharing thoughts, ideas,
fair
words.
Enough. These movements, you were at the State Department, these movements have existed for hundreds of years trying to overthrow governments. There's nothing unique or new about this. You could argue it followed the same pattern, fair enough. You could argue that some of them were being supported by, that may also be true. But no one needed America's January 6th to decide that they were going to try and overthrow duly elected governments. We could in 20 minutes, we could come up with 50 of them amongst the group assembled.
So do you think what happened in Brazil had nothing to do with the example that we sent across the world?
I hope this part. On January 6th, we certified an election.
Yeah.
And we began a transition of leadership. I hope the Brazilians are able to do the same thing.
Can you talk us through what you were doing on January 6th and what, as Secretary of State, I'm fascinated.
Sure. I was in Washington. We can. I'll be honest with you. I don't think that's remotely relevant to the most important things that happened during our administration. I know CNN would tell you differently and MSNBC would tell you differently. I don't put that in the top 40 things that happened in our 4 years.
But I think it was an important day for our country.
Yeah, we got through it.
And were you getting calls that day from other diplomats?
So you can read about this in my book a little bit.
Spoiler alert.
I've talked about it before. I was at the State Department. I literally, if you go look at the work that we finished in the last 3.5 weeks, the January time period and the end of December time period, very busy. I learned about what was going on at the Capitol late that afternoon, so 1:30, 2 o'clock, 2:30. flipped on the TV. Shortly thereafter, I actually called the vice president, who I had known from my time in Congress.
Here a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and so called the vice president. I think I got through to his chief of staff, Mark Short, and just said, "You guys okay? Everything good? Anything I can do to help?" They said, "Nope. We think we've got it figured out." And I went back to my day. There was much to do.
You were getting ready for transition.
We were full on in transition. We'd been in transition for 6 or 7 weeks at that point in time. But we weren't just getting ready to do transition. We made the declaration on genocide. We straightened out American policy on Taiwan. We shored up our defenses in the Middle East. There was still a lot of work going on, even in those last 10, 12, 14 days.
And as your boss, President Trump, was alleging that the election was stolen, do you believe that the election was stolen?
No.
Okay, good. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why it's so shocking.
No.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get that there's lots of people that want to talk about January 6th, 2021.
Yeah.
And I understand that. I'll give you a different story about a different January 6th. If you've got me 2 minutes.
Sure.
January 6th, 2017, I was a member of Congress from South Central Kansas. I was also the nominee to be CIA director. And I was asked to come to Trump Tower for a briefing that was going to be given to the President-elect of the United States of America. And in that room were Director Comey of the FBI, Director Clapper, the DNI, and John Brennan, the then director of the CIA. They briefed the President of the United States that day on the Steele dossier, which we now know to be a complete hoax. And they essentially told an incoming President of the United States that the intelligence community believed the President of the United States to be a Russian asset. Take a deep breath about what that means. If you're a former real estate guy from New York, now President-elect of the United States, and the intelligence services are telling you wrongly, and we now know knowingly wrongly, telling you that you are akin to a Russian asset. This is a disaster for the United States of America, and it burdened our administration for 2.5 years. And they knew it, and it was underwritten by folks associated with the DNC, and it was a calamity for American national security. That's the January 6th that I actually think had the most impact on the United States of America, because it prevented us from doing so many of the things that I think would have served this country incredibly well.
Can we stay on foreign policy for a little bit
Sure.
and talk about it?
That's foreign policy.
No, I know.
That's deeply foreign policy. When you now told the President of the United States he is a Russian asset because some knucklehead paid for by the DNC says that he went to Moscow and played with hookers, right? This is the story. And we should not forget that for 2.5 years on every major network in America, this was the narrative. And we ultimately had a president impeached as a result of this. That really mattered. And by the way, you should know, I don't mean this in a partisan sense. The risk is that this will happen again. And I don't know who the president will be. I don't know whether it'll be a Democrat or Republican president. We have to have services, law enforcement agencies that are actually functioning in a way that is not partisan and based on true facts, not on things and stories they want to go tell.
So how do we do that?
Good leadership from the top.
Yeah.
And holding those accountable. You now have a fellow, he may come speak here. You may have Mr. McCabe come speak here. Mr. McCabe lied to the American people. Director Comey lied to the American people. And they are still running around telling stories as if the problem set was President Trump and his actions before he took office. Yeah. It's just not true.
So I want to talk about Afghanistan. Now, you were involved in negotiating with the Taliban and
Yes.
looking at the situation
Countless hours.
in the country right now,
Yeah.
particularly that women can't go to school, they can't go to work. How would you define the legacy of our mission in Afghanistan?
Oh, goodness. It's mixed, for sure. For any of you who served in Afghanistan, I've met countless folks who did. Bless you for what you did. As CI director, I saw the work that was done. We saved scores of American lives by our presence there in Afghanistan for 20 years. And so I want to personally thank you all for the work that you did to keep us all so safe. I can't talk about the terror plots that were taken down, but you should all know, everyone should know there were dozens and dozens and dozens that were taken down. So it is unambiguous good that we saved American lives as a result of our activity there. President Trump campaigned on getting out of Afghanistan, and the American people wanted them out.
Yeah.
President Biden campaigned saying he would do the same. And the American people were done, tired, exhausted from this. Pick a descriptor. So for my entire time, the agency had a big footprint there. And so even when I was CIA director, the president was pressing to get out faster, to get us out more quickly. But we were pretty clear with him that we couldn't do it. That we couldn't get everyone out. And so we went from 15,000 or so uniformed U.S. military personnel to about 2,500 over the 4 years. But the president, I'd walk in, the president would say, Mike, you're not getting out fast enough. And I would remind him that if we took the last 2,500 out, if we took the final stick out of the Jenga stack, that bad things would happen. Yeah. And they did when President Biden made that choice. Right? He made the choice to set a date certain and pull out. And that end was devastatingly bad. Bad for morale in our military, bad for American security. You should know our friends don't trust us as much as they did the day before that, and our adversaries do not fear us as much. And while I cannot prove it, I am convinced that Vladimir Putin's moves in Europe were at least in part his observations on how President Biden handled the departure from Afghanistan.
When you were working with the Taliban, or speaking with the Taliban to facilitate the peace process, did you ever consider asking President Ghani to step down?
Well, he would think that I did, but I didn't. I was incredibly frustrated with President Ghani. It took us to step in and finally get all the Afghans to the negotiating table. This is an effort that President Obama had tried to undertake even a little bit before that, just to get conversations going. And we ultimately achieved it. And President Ghani was against that. He didn't want to do that. He'd just been, quote, reelected, end of quote. He stole the election, just more effective than his competitor at stealing votes. And so he was against it. He was very upset that the United States had convened with the Taliban. But if you go look at that meeting, it was fascinating. It was probably my, fourth or fifth meeting with the Taliban senior leadership. These were tough meetings. The deputy that I met with almost certainly killed a friend of mine. That's hard stuff to walk into a room negotiating with someone that you think killed someone that you loved. But it mattered for America to try and get that right. If we were going to wind down, you had to get some kind of understanding amongst all the various Afghan entities. So if you go look at that meeting, we had every group. We had the Northern Alliance there. We had women's rights groups there. We had human rights groups there. We had everyone sitting around the table, and we were probably in for a 5-year, 10-year negotiation. These processes after big wars, historic achievement would be to pull off a peace agreement in 3 years or 5 years. And we were hopeful that we had begun to head down that road. But it was going to take some American presence there to do it. And President Ghani wasn't up for that, didn't want to participate in it, and that was most unfortunate because in the end, you see what happens. Unlike Zelensky, who chose to stay, President Ghani hops on an airplane and heads to someplace to go live a very nice, peaceful life while there's so many people suffering in Afghanistan.
The Abraham Accords are something that you see as like a signature, I think, achievement of your time at Department of State. When you look at kind of this new Israeli government, do you think that they can be an effective ally for the United States? And what do you think the future is of the Abraham Accords?
Yeah. Good. So I know Prime Minister Netanyahu very well. I think he's now the 6th-time Prime Minister. Yeah, I mean, the nation of Israel will be a good partner of ours. Governments come, for much of our time, the government in Israel was pretty unstable. But governments come, governments go. The relationship with the United States and Israel will remain. Yeah, they'll be a good partner. It is hard to imagine the Abraham Accords expanding when the administration is negotiating with the Iranians. If you stare at how the Abraham Accords came to be, it wasn't that we had dreamed this up and said, let's go do this. It evolved through our theory of the case in the Middle East, which was friend and partner in Israel, full-throated support for them. Second, the Iranians are the world's largest state sponsor of terror, crush them. And those two things in combination gave the Gulf Arab states, the Muslim states in the region, the Sunni Muslim states in the region, confidence sufficient that said, we can now recognize Israel's right to exist. And those things all came together to create the Abraham Accords. And when you pull that out, when you now say, well, no, we're going to go sit and potentially give the Iranians a clear pathway to a nuclear weapon, there's no Arab leader that is going to sign up for a deal with Israel that might cause the street in his country to blow up, because they don't think that America will have their back.
So speaking of Iran, and we've seen this kind of popular protest movement that's happening after the death of Mahsa Amini through the hands of the Israeli police. What do you think the U.S., do you think there should be regime change? I think I know your answer. And how do you think we should go about that?
Yes, the regime must
change. Or what
change.
is the U.S. government, what's the U.S. government's role? Support that regime change.
So the regime must change. I'll leave to the Iranian people the methodology and the how to do that. It's not our place. But we should put an enormous amount of pressure on that regime, giving the Iranian people the opportunity to restore the great traditions in that country.
So what is our role?
It is to deny wealth and resources to the Iranians, to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon, and to support the Iranian people in their efforts to reconstitute a government that is not a kleptocracy and not a theocracy and not a global state sponsor of terror intent on nuclear annihilation of Israel and the United States. It's pretty simple. I'm laughing.
I'm going to take us domestic, which last week we saw Kevin McCarthy attain the speakership after a bruising 15 rounds. And, your former boss, Donald Trump, was instrumental in delivering the speakership. What is this whole process as we saw it play out? I know you in the green room said you didn't really watch it, you were busy, but I'm sure you've read about it since. What does it say about the future of the Republican Party and its ability to work in coalition?
The Republican Party is rambunctious. Find a point in history when it wasn't. I'll give you all day. It's always had. We've got lots of different groups. You've got Republicans from the Northeast. You've got conservative Republicans from the heartland. You have libertarians. To your point, you have those that have very different foreign policy views. I view this as a manifestation of that. And you have, just like in any government, when you have a slim majority, you allow those with views that are at one end or other of the political spectrum to have an increase in the capacity for power. Think Joe Manchin's power in the Democrat Party in the last term, right? Most powerful Democrat on Capitol Hill. Wasn't the most liberal Democrat. He may have been amongst the most conservative Democrats. The same phenomenon takes place here. So they'll be fine. They'll find their way through. I'm untroubled by it. I was untroubled by the 15 votes too. This is consistent with our history in the nation. People go, they represent their district, and when people of the district get tired of them, they'll kick them out.
You said that you were going to make a decision about running for office in the spring, and I know we did not.
Still winter.
We didn't deliver good weather today. This is Chicago spring. Where are you on that? Are you planning to run for office?
I don't know. I've been very candid about it. We're getting ready. My wife and I, team, getting ready. But to make the decision to run for president of the United States is both deeply personal and frankly kind of arrogant, right? To think that you ought to be the leader of the free world. And one really needs to be thoughtful and serious about that, and not only believe that this is the moment that you should put yourself forward, believe that you can actually deliver on the things that you intend to campaign on. So it's one thing to campaign and tell folks you're going to do X or Y. It's another thing to have a theory of the case about where America finds itself today, to think you can actually deliver on those. You should only promise the things that you believe you have a reasonable chance of delivering. And so you need to be, we're doing our best to be prayerful and patient and thoughtful as we deliberate if this is the right moment for the Pompeos to go to Iowa and make our case.
Sure. I appreciate your, humility and I think transparency in really, trying to decide when you're going to maybe make that decision or feel called to that. If you were to run for office, what do you think, what sets you apart from your former boss? What sets you apart from, Ron DeSantis, who's a front runner?
Oh, goodness. I just don't want to compare myself to any of them. The story with President Trump is I had never met him until I went to Trump Tower to be interviewed to be CIA director. Never crossed paths with him. By disposition, it's hard to find two people more different. But we developed a working relationship that was highly functional for the American people. And so I am deeply grateful for the opportunity he gave me. I mean, we were unique, right? It was a very unique administration. You will not, I say that. I'm proud of our uniqueness. I ran a machine shop in Wichita, Kansas. You will not have another machine shop owner as Secretary of State. Yeah. You can write it down. I don't care how young you are in your lifetime, that's unlikely to happen. We came from this diverse set of backgrounds, and I think the policies that we delivered were pretty darn good.
I'm going to go to Q&A in about a minute or so. So get your questions ready, and there'll be people running with mics. Joel's over there in the corner. Which job did you enjoy more, CIA director or Secretary of State?
Remember I said I wouldn't answer everything?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very different jobs. The job as CIA director is pretty cool and pretty fun. And you have a workforce that is amazing and deeply patriotic. And so that was fun. You also, when you travel, I was joking earlier, I mean this seriously, when you travel as CIA director, the media is not with you, and that is glorious. The job as Secretary of State has a lot more scope and a lot more capacity to shape. We shaped religious freedom around the world. I think we reshaped the way America thinks about the threat from the Chinese Communist Party. You can't do that as a CIA director. You're just the facts person.
Secretary Pompeo, that's a very diplomatic answer.
Yeah. On any given day, it's much more joyous to be in your own little space. Yeah. There's my answer.
Okay. Still a little murky. Okay, Joel, go ahead. Yeah. Oh, I can go.
Hey, how you doing? My name is John. I currently go to the Harris School of Public Policy here at UChicago. Thank you very much for being here today. I have a little bit of a lengthier question, but in the last weeks of the Trump administration, you guys made some decisions, as you guys alluded to, and one of those was designating Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism, and one of the reasons was for the refusal to return Assata Shakur to prison in the U.S. So I'm sure you're aware that in her trial, which took place during a time that was not particularly kind to Black liberation fighters like herself, she was convicted by an all-white jury, and she was proven to have been anatomically unable to pull the trigger due to a severed median nerve. So despite all of this, I'm just wondering what made you believe so strongly in Assata's conviction that you listed this as one of the main reasons to list Cuba as only the 4th country in the world as a state sponsor of terrorism?
Yeah, I can't answer that question because some of the information that I know I just can't share with you. But I remain confident that our decision to make that designation was both constructive and appropriate. For many reasons. You talked about it being one of a handful of reasons we cited. Yes, sir. Thanks for the question.
Hi, I am curious. Okay, hold it.
You guys should stand up. Annie, okay. You should stand up.
Hi there, Annie Henderson, also from the Harris School. January 6th, I think a lot of people think that a lot of things went wrong with intelligence and law enforcement. I'm curious, although I know it's a little bit outside of your purview given that it's domestic, do you see January 6th as an intelligence and law enforcement failure? And if so, what kind of lessons should we be learning about it so that that doesn't happen again in the future?
That's a good question. I only know about sort of the intelligence piece. This would have been domestic intelligence, so I only know about that really from what I've read. I don't have any true inside knowledge, but it certainly looks to me like the FBI, who would have had primary federal responsibility for that, knew a fair amount about what was in the works. Probably no complete laydown, but a fair amount. And then yes, I think it was absolutely a law enforcement failure, and I hope we'll continue to figure that out. Those Capitol Hill police protected me when I was a member of Congress. I loved them. I counted on them. And that day they didn't execute. They weren't able to protect the people inside of that building. That is almost by definition a failure. I don't know enough to assign responsibility to know precisely what the failures were, but we should absolutely be staring at not just that, but because the Capitol does matter, it is a unique place, but we should be staring at all of the things that prevented a duly empowered law enforcement agency from actually executing the defense that it needed to keep it safe. Think about all the other federal facilities, federal courthouses in places like Chicago. I think there's a fundamental reevaluation that needs to be done to make sure are we prepared to actually confront the things that are now possible, given all that we know about the threats that are facing our country from inside of the country as well.
Jen?
Thank you. My name is Tong Yuguo. I'm also from the Harris School of Public Policy. And first of all, I would like to give you a personal thank you for your support for religious freedom, especially those from China. I myself, my family, I came from China because of the persecution of Falun Gong. But my question is regarding Taiwan. I would like to hear your thoughts on what would be the U.S. best action if Chinese Communist Party decide to take in military actions against Taiwan, and how would you compare that regarding the current U.S. actions to the Russia's invasion to Ukraine?
Yeah.
And thank you.
Before I answer the question, what should we do if China attacks? We should all be mindful. The time to do the work is before that, right? The time to stop the Russians from invading Ukraine was before they invaded. And one of my core critiques of President Biden's efforts is that in September, now a year and a half ago almost, they knew, the intelligence agencies knew he was planning an invasion. Indeed, Director Burns went around the world telling our allies that that was the case. But they failed in the core mission. So they got through the first step of the 12-step program. We have a problem, but didn't get to how do you prevent the problem? So when I think about Taiwan at its center, this is the moment we should be providing all of the work that reduces the chance that Xi Jinping will decide to use military power to take over Taiwan. So allies, partners, friends, equipment that they need, all of those things that one can do to create risk, so Xi Jinping will think I might get in just as much hot water as Vladimir Putin did in Ukraine. Finally, I actually, and I disagree with many of my Republican friends here, I actually think Xi Jinping won't invade because I don't think he believes he needs to. I absolutely believe he's intent on bringing them under the mainland China Communist Party umbrella, but I think it'll look more like Hong Kong. One of the things that breaks my heart from my time as Secretary of State is that we didn't do more to help the people of Hong Kong. I talk in my book about things we succeeded on, things we failed on. I'd put this in the we didn't get it done bucket. I don't know that we could have ever stopped it, but we could have done more to create more space, more freedom, more rule of law there, and maybe provided a more sustainable model along with the United Kingdom there. We should do those same things to help the Taiwanese people create that space so that when Xi begins to do the kinds of things he did in Hong Kong, take over the police, use military power, propaganda efforts, maybe blockade a smaller island, when he begins to tighten down, there is more resiliency there. And those are the things we should be thinking about today to deter him.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Spencer Dalton. I'm a first-year undergraduate here at the university. My question concerns, following the events of January 6, 2021, there was briefly some discussion of invoking Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. As a principal officer of an executive agency at the time, would you have signed on to a cabinet-level effort to remove President Trump from office under Section 4?
No.
Anything else to say on that?
It wasn't a close call. You can go read my testimony before the January 6th committee if you want a bit of a fuller explanation. But if you go read section, we're 14 days out. There's all this talk about whether Secretary Mnuchin and I spoke about the 25th Amendment, and there's a phone call between myself and then Secretary of Labor Scalia where he wanted to grab a cabinet meeting. I knew what needed to be done the next 14 days to keep America safe and secure. And so from my perspective, it was never something that I remotely thought of. We had cabinet members quit, right? We had cabinet members leave the office. I never thought about resigning for a single second. I was your Secretary of State. Like, who gets to be the Secretary of State? And I had a lot of work to do. And so everybody thinks about January 6th. I was thinking about January 20th. Like, how am I going to get all this important work completed? And so for me, this was not something that it didn't even really remotely pass my mind.
Who's next? Jen, do you have someone? Or
Hi, my name is Chandler James. I'm a PhD candidate in the political science department. I study presidential norms, and I'm interested in talking to elite actors who have been a part of that. So according to the literature and newspaper outlets, President Trump broke a lot of presidential norms. How did his norm-violating behavior affect your ability to do your job as Secretary of State and CIA and lead the CIA? And how do you think his norm-violating behavior affected Americans in their trust and belief in the American government?
Mm-hmm. Tell me which norms you're speaking to. say a lot of norms.
So he refused.
I think that's, by the way, I think that's true. I think your predicate is right. I think he did break a bunch of norms, but which ones in particular? Is there anything?
Ones that come to mind that we've discussed a lot today is refusing to facilitate a peaceful transfer of power, refusing to release his tax returns, attacking his political opponents, leading chants of lock her up for his political enemies, and using government agencies to attack his political enemies.
Well, if you want to talk about government agencies attacking political enemies, we're living it. We're living it right now. So one shouldn't throw too many stones when one's in a glass house. No president should use the power of the United States government to attack their political enemies. For example, President Obama should not have used his IRS to make sure that conservative groups couldn't get their proper 501c3 tax preparation. There's a long history of this in America. So when you say breaking norms, I just ask you to expand your universe of reading and history, because many presidents break lots of norms. I can think about scores of norms that were broken by President Roosevelt. He threatened to pack the court. I mean, this is not, everyone wants to just focus on the last 20 minutes when in fact, what's really important here, and I'll get to your very first question. You said, how did it impact me? It impacted me an awful lot, sometimes in good ways. Think about this. One of the norms that folks talk about is the way he communicated, right? He used his Twitter account. I can do the greatest hits, the Twitter account. The fact that when he tweeted about North Korea, he tweeted, "My button is bigger than your button," and fire and fury. You all laugh. Enormously important for America's most senior diplomat, because Chairman Kim took note of that and knew two things. One, we could bring fire and fury, and our red button is bigger than his. And he had a president that he didn't know, right? He didn't know how this person would behave. And that gave me enormous capacity to actually shape our diplomacy in that place. We were ultimately not successful in getting his nuclear weapons out of his hands. And so it kind of cuts both ways. There were other days it made my job more difficult, more complicated. I had to go reassure allies on certain things. So that's certainly the case. You mentioned a couple others. I believe in these institutions. When you read the book, I hope you will. I hope you'll grab it. If you don't want to pay $25 for it, go to the library and grab one. I'm not trying to sell books here, but when you go read it, you will see that these institutions matter. They have to be profoundly trustworthy. The senior leaders need to speak about those institutions in ways that are respectful. We don't need to be inaccurate. When the State Department behaves poorly, one should call it out. When the IRS behaves poorly, one should call it out. But these institutions really matter. Our republic depends on that. And when the American people begin to lose faith and confidence in those institutions, our republic is at risk. There is no doubt about it. I think that's really where your question was going. And so I hope leaders everywhere, and here I'm not just thinking about presidents and senators and congressmen. I'm thinking about school board members. I'm thinking about business leaders. I'm thinking about rabbis in synagogues. When leaders refuse to acknowledge that this is the greatest nation in the history of civilization, there's some risk that someday it won't be. And so we all need to be mindful of that and do our best. And I fail from time to time too. You can go look at a few times when I was a member of Congress when I had a bad day. And I'm not proud of that. But we need serious leaders in every walk of life, from the business community to faith community, everywhere, to recognize that we get lots of challenges here in America, but there ain't nothing like this place. And so we can't tear down these institutions. We need to work to fix them where we can and build them and make them fit for function and form so that they are focused on their mission and not something else. I hope that answers it at least.
We have time for
at least in part.
One more question, probably. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, actually, I'm going to ask a question. My name is Kate. I'm an intern at the IOP and a second year in the college. I am taking a class right now called The Secret Side of International Politics. It's all on hidden diplomacy. I've just got a book in on cyber warfare, and I know that from my understanding, under the Trump administration, you all sort of deployed a strategy of offensive cyber warfare. I'm wondering your thoughts on that, and going forward, is it strategic for the U.S. to be ahead of the game on attacking our adversaries in cyber warfare, or should we focus on deterrence and security when it comes to our adversaries attacking us? Yeah. Thank you.
It's a fantastic question. I can only say just a little bit about that because, as you said, a bunch of this is in fact hidden. But this is a fair point. we should all do everything we can to secure our infrastructure, to secure our energy, financial infrastructure. Defense matters. We should spend resources, time getting defense right. But in that space, in cyberspace, defense is incredibly hard to play. The bad guy only has to be successful once, and they are hard at it. And so we have a model for deterrence in the conventional world, conventional military world. We have a model for deterrence in the nuclear world, long-range nuclear missile world, strategic weapon systems. We do not have a highly defined deterrence model in cyberspace, and it is. I don't mean that because people haven't been thinking about it, but because people a lot smarter than me on this struggle to try and figure it out. It is the case that in our administration, we believed that there were effective ways that didn't create too much risk to actually use our tools to push back against known bad actors in ways that imposed real costs on them. You can call it defensive. We thought about it as counteroffensive. Because when one just lets it go and responds by issuing a démarche, a statement to the country, you get no deterrence. We wanted to impose real costs on the primary actors that were connected to those cyber actions. And so we did broaden the way we thought about using America's cyber capabilities to actually impose costs on dangerous cyber actors around the world. That is certainly true. And I think we need to do more of that. And we need to think through. The last piece I'll say is the reason there is resistance to doing that is twofold. Once you use one of those tools, it's out there, can create second-order impacts. The boomerang effect is real. And second, a lot of these are one-time use things. And so once you use it, you're kind of done using it. And so those who have created that capability want to make sure you're only using it in the most important instances. I think we can accomplish both at the same time, and we should be less concerned about blowback. We should instead prepare for the potential blowback and then impose costs. I think we can reduce the total amount of cyber harm that comes to, really, it's our private sector here in the United States.
Secretary Pompeo, you're sitting in front of an audience of young people who are interested in politics and public service. What is your advice, call to action in like 30 seconds, because we're past
Goodness, call to action. First of all, there are so many ways to do public service. I felt like when I ran a little machine shop in Wichita and employed a couple hundred people, I was serving my community. So I don't limit my concept of public service to just entering government. Having said that, if you get a chance and you find a place where you think you can make a difference, running for city council, running for school board, serving on a governmental commission, you should take some point in your life. Everybody has cycles. We raise our families. Find some point in your life to go give back to this amazing place. And you will both personally benefit from that, and we, the American people, will benefit from that as well. And so that would be my admonition. The second thing I tell folks who have the political bug is go do something productive first. I found that, and it's not always the case, the most productive people that I served with in Congress had been out in the world doing something. They didn't come from being on the committee staff and then go back and work for a state senator. And they often had a pretty government-centric view of the world. And I always appreciated folks who had been out there, whether they had been missionaries or they'd worked in business. I always found that experience set added an awful lot to the political process. And so my encouragement would be, if you have the political bug and you're about to graduate and you're thinking about running for office, hold that thought. And then if you still got it 2 years or 3 years or 5 years down the road, then go at it with all your heart.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for being here today. Please join me in
thank you all very much.
Pompeo.